Welcome back, Tim.
Hey. Thank you very much. So our next guests are, we build this as a panel about cloud infrastructure, but really it's a CTO panel. And what we're trying to get at here is the future of the cloud. I have with me Padmasree Warrior, who's the CTO of Cisco, and Shane Robison, the CTO of HP. I'd like to welcome them out. Thank you very much. All right. Why don't you guys have a seat over on the couch? All right. So, we're going to be looking at, cloud computing futures and role of your companies. You're kind of the cloud infrastructure suppliers to the cloud infrastructure suppliers in some sense. And, we're also, I'd really like to talk about some of the where the cloud might be going. We're still in early days. But before we do that, I wanted to spend some time on the role of the CTO. And in particular, I'm impelled to do this because of the whole discussion about the idea that we may have a federal CTO. And I thought it would be really useful. You guys are CTOs at two of the biggest and most successful technology companies on the planet. You know the role intimately. You figured out how to make it work. And I'd like to get on the record just like what you do, how it works in your organizations. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about how it works.
So I think that's an interesting question. If you look at the role of the CTO, it's probably one of the few C-level positions that doesn't have a universal definition. And it's actually morphed, the role of the CTO is, I think, morphed significantly in the last several years. I've spent about half my career, almost 10 years as a chief technology officer or head of research, et cetera. And if you think back, it started off, the role used to be defined many years ago as a chief engineer, or somebody who led a group of engineers and scientists and ran research and thought about the next things. Today, what I do at Cisco as a chief technology officer is so much broader than that. It involves a lot of, for a global company or for any entity that has to deal with innovation that is truly global, a lot of my role is visiting different countries, talking to policymakers, and understanding what their issues are from a technology perspective. So that's a big chunk of what I do. And the other part of it is to think about new things, new ideas, or industry-changing market transitions that will occur. They could be technology-driven, or they could be catalyzed by some technology changes, but really are more market changes. So cloud computing sort of falls in that category of how is computing going to change, and what role does the network change?
In some sense, thinking about the future and its impact on the business,
right.
And in this case, on the customers.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And a third part of it is really spending a lot of time with customers, because big companies, it's easy to get distracted and get involved in so many different things, and both of us have very broad companies. So how do we maintain focus? So spending time with customers in different segments, understanding what their needs are, what problems do they have that we can really solve. So I think those are some things that we do. So it's more now about thinking broadly across solutions, which involve multiple technologies rather than being a singularly deep expert in one area.
How about you, Shane?
I think if you had to capture it in a word, I would say strategy, which is different than the role has been in the past. What we try and do is look out at major trends and really develop a context within which we can make business decisions about where to invest and where to place our bets going forward. My role is sort of a combination. I have corporate strategy and business development, the technology community with the CTOs, and the chief marketing officer. So we bring together the business strategy and the technology strategy and the customer and market strategy into one context, which helps us provide sort of a framework for the businesses as they look out into the future and decide products and services and trade-offs in market segments.
So at HP, you actually have a CTO organization where each division has its own CTO. They report to you rather than to the division heads, but there's some kind of matrix there. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have 8 senior CTOs, and they're on all the areas that you would expect. In the PC group, and in printing has a couple, and the enterprise systems group has several. And they're my direct staff, but they spend 99% of their time with the businesses. And what that allows us to do is, as I said, we get together as a team and form a strategy that's developed in the context of what we think the major trends and shifts are in the marketplace, and then they can take that back to the businesses and use that as part of how they drive decision making.
So in terms of for both of you, in terms of the actual decision making, push comes to shove, you have a disagreement with the operating business head. How does that get resolved?
So the way we run at Cisco is we have enterprise-focused councils. So enterprise meaning segment-focused councils. So we have a enterprise business council, small business council, commercial business council. These are more market-facing councils that involve not just the business leaders, but actually our sales leaders and people that run services organization, et cetera. So we make decisions that pertain to a particular market in those councils. So it's not really up to just a singular business leader to make the decision. So if something like cloud computing that cuts across, let's say, many of these councils, that sort of falls in my lap. I mean, it's my responsibility to figure out what Cisco should do about it, what our role should be, who do we partner with, what should we build, and then I would go and sort of influence the decision making through these councils that are segment focused.
So what about sort of the relationship to a CIO? So you have presumably a CIO in your company as well. So how does that work? What's the division of responsibilities?
So for us, I work very closely with the CIO. In my role, I work extremely closely with our M&A group because they're looking at startups and innovation that's happening outside the company. And Cisco, as you know, is a company of acquisitions. It's a company throughout its history has acquired about 125 companies. So very heavily focused at looking at innovation outside. So I work extremely closely with that group. I work very closely with our field organization and our sales team to engage with customers. And the third group I work closely is with our CIO group. So I think the main difference, if you look at what a CTO has to do and what a CIO has to do, CIO's role is much more operational. It's to drive efficiency of implementing the technology, trying new technologies, like applying Web 2.0 tools internally. What does it take? And Cisco strongly believes in anything we try. We eat our own dog food, so to speak. So we call it Cisco on Cisco. And so Rebecca, my counterpart, is the individual, and her team drive that. My role is much more externally focused. It's really outbound, and her role is more inside the company.
How about
it's a pretty clean division at HP. Randy Mata is our CIO, and he runs all the infrastructure that we use to run our business. What I focus on, and the CTOs and the technology community, is the technology that goes into the products that Randy then uses. So we view him as our best showcase of technology.
Sometimes he's a customer for the future.
He is a big customer. Yeah. So we focus on the things that go into our products and into our services to differentiate us in the marketplace. Randy takes all that and puts it into an infrastructure that we use to run our own business.
So let's talk about relationship to sort of the labs function. I assume that the HP Labs comes under your responsibility, and you have the equivalent at Cisco. John Doerr on Wednesday, talked about a recommendation to the administration for sort of the restoration of the kind of visionary role that DARPA once played in basic research, as opposed to the more tactical model it has today. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the role of labs and its equivalent in your organizations?
Sure. The labs at HP, there's only a few big technology companies left that have labs. We happen to have 2 of them. And it's really a key part of the forward-looking agenda that we have. Our labs are sort of a 3 to 10 year time frame in terms of what they're looking out at. And we tend to organize our research efforts in major themes. So themes like information explosion, next generation commercial print. We have themes around nanotechnology and some of the fundamental underpinnings of what we want to put into the infrastructure. So the labs give us the expertise and the ability to investigating the further out things that we know we're going to need. If you look at what the government's done in the past, when I was in school, which was a long time ago, I was lucky enough to be at Utah, which was one of the first 4 ARPANET connection points. And that was an incredible insight that was driven by people like Ivan Sutherland in the early days. That was basically the foundation for everything we're seeing today with the internet and beyond. And I think those are the kinds of things that the government needs to focus on. What's the next equivalent of that as we move into more of an information economy with information explosion? We now have all the networking, all the storage, all the computing. I mean, we're obviously going to need more, but those capabilities are there. Now it's more about how do we leverage this massive amount of information that we have and really transition to an information-based economy.
So let me ask each of you, what's the coolest thing in your labs that we're all going to be blown away by as it hits the mainstream?
So for us, I think it's evolution of telepresence, and actually the whole role video is going to play in the future. We're very excited about that. Today, telepresence is in production, as you know, and it's if you haven't tried it, it's a very immersive experience.
I totally agree. It's awesome.
You should come to Cisco's.
You sit there in a telepresence room, and it really is very close to being across the table from someone.
Yeah, and by the way, it's interesting, during this downturn, we're actually seeing a lot more demand for technologies like that, because as people have to reduce travel costs, it's also a time when companies have to spend more time with customers. And so telepresence allows you to do that without traveling.
Yeah, I mean, John says he's basically cut his travel by
$100 million or
yeah,
more.
I mean, just huge amounts.
In
And
the last year.
Dozens of meetings a day via telepresence they used to have to fly around the world for.
So we're doing a lot of work in the video area within our labs and our technology organizations. And the vision we have is, if you think about video and how it's evolved, years ago it was, actually until recently, it was a very passive experience. We just basically sat in front of a TV and whatever content was pushed to us, we watched that. And then we went to time shifting, and we're just now beginning to play shift video. And now it's playing more of a role in interactive communications. Going forward,
and of course this drives bandwidth, which drives Cisco's business. So you're kind of in the Intel position of whatever uses
whatever
more bandwidth is.
Yeah. But I think there's an important point here. If you think about what video can do and combine that with social networking aspects of it. We call that visual networking, and we think we're just at the tip of that. And there's a lot of problems that have to be solved for that. Even in the internet infrastructure, some of the things that products we build were not meant to handle video delivery. And so there's a lot of problems, tricky problems that have to be solved to do that.
That's great. So I know you have this Halo telepresence system as well. So you guys are in that, but that can't be the coolest thing at HP Labs. You gotta have something even cooler.
We're very excited about our Halo product, and it's this is one of the areas where she and I are in competition. But we've got a lot of different things going on in the labs. One of the things that's very exciting is the work we're doing in nanotechnology and the recent announcements around the memristor, which is a fundamental breakthrough in.
Can you maybe describe that briefly for the audience so people?
Well, it's the fourth element in terms of non-volatile storage that will fundamentally change the way the storage part of the computer architecture works. So that's very exciting. But some of the most interesting stuff we're working on has to do with changes in the way we think about and access information. So we've got a program called BRAIN, which is an interesting combination of behavioral information, historical information, and probability theory that allows you to predict things like the prices of commodities. We use it in our procurement operation. We use it in our treasury part of our business. And it's the kind of thing that
we can make derivatives on that.
That's exactly right. And it's the kind of thing that you can introduce as a cloud-based service so people can actually have access to the technology. We're doing a lot in terms of understanding social networking, understanding context, personalization as you access cloud services. So things that would help you do everything in context. So context is a really important piece for us. Search being done for you rather than by you. Very important part of what we think will help people navigate the information landscape.
Cool. Before we get on to the cloud part of the discussion, I want to ask each of you just if you had one piece of advice to the people who are trying to construct the federal office of the CTO, what would it be?
I think there are some very important technology challenges that face the world today, in terms of energy, finding not just alternative energy solutions, but actually applying existing technologies to do that. I think the internet actually can play a strong role, and IP networking can play a strong role in helping us be more energy efficient. And Cisco, we are exploring some of those things. In terms of building, and I'm focusing more on the technology piece of it, and science and technology education in the US, I think we are moving to a world that is fast becoming, in terms of educational focus, things need to be more multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, right?
So really the CTO role should be chief technology cheerleader as well as everything else.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think my advice would be to focus. The temptation in whether it's a government or a big company is to try and sort of dabble in everything, and so you don't get much done. I think they really need to focus on whatever the equivalent of what we did with ARPANET is, and pick the big trend and put a lot of wood behind that arrow. So that's hard. It's hard in that context.
All right, that's good advice. So let's move to cloud. First of all, what does cloud mean to you? Everybody is using the buzzword these days, and they're using it for very different things. So maybe let's do a little bit of level setting. When you think about cloud, what do you think about?
So I'll go first. I think you're right. There's a lot of hype, but there's also a lot of benefits in what the cloud actually has to offer for us. And when we think about cloud from a Cisco perspective, we think of it as the next evolution of where computing is going, right? So we had mainframes, then we had PCs, mini computers, and then we had the client-server model, and now we are going, so we're going to evolve to a different model. And so when we think about cloud, essentially, it's a way of abstracting the services and application away from the physical resources. So you go to more of an on-demand model of delivery. So there are different layers we look at in that model. There's an application layer, which is SaaS, right? Software as a service. So how can services start getting delivered more as software components? And there's a lot of challenges in that space, but also a lot of opportunity. Then there's a middleware or a platform layer, which is platform as a service, as it's called in the industry. And then there's a flexible infrastructure, which is the model that Amazon has today in delivering infrastructure as a service. And then there's an IT foundation at the bottom that has to enable this to happen. Now, it's still very early in the evolution phase, and it's probably not dissimilar to many of these major transitions we went through. It always starts off with small companies, it's a long tail that's using today the Amazon model of cloud. And so when do we reach the tipping point with that technology, and what has to happen for us to reach that tipping point? And it's our view that it'll have to evolve. Today we have these standalone clouds, whether it's on-premise or external clouds, like private clouds as people call them, where an enterprise builds its own cloud, or where they are hosted somewhere else. So we call that both those are standalone clouds. But the next evolution of that has to be a hybrid cloud. So if you have your certain applications that you're putting in your own cloud, and you want to have that application at some point move to an external cloud, how do you make that happen? And
that's Paul Moritz was talking about that yesterday.
Right.
That's a lot of what their strategy is at VMware,
Exactly.
to kind of make it, not a big issue to move one way or the other.
And you need standards to make
Yeah.
that happen. And then eventually, my vision is that we'll have to move to something that I call an intercloud, right? This is where you have multiple clouds, some small, some large, and there has to be federation that has to occur for application information to move around. And it's not that different from the way the internet evolved. We had LANs, and then those got connected, and we got WANs, and then we had internet. And so we think the evolution with the cloud will have to happen in that same way, where we'll move from standalone clouds to hybrid clouds to intercloud, or a federated version of multiple clouds. So there's a lot of work that has to get done for us to move
It's kind of
there.
like recapitulating the history of the internet, where we had all these networks, and bit by bit, it's like, hey, this is too silly. We start gatewaying them together, and finally, let's just all use the same protocol.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So that's our vision, and
Yeah.
we are working with different companies to see, like-minded companies, to see how we can enable more standardization to move away from some of the proprietary architectures.
So how do you guys think about it at HP?
Well, in addition to all of the technology vision, and I agree with almost everything you said. We think there's a really exciting opportunity to present all that as a service. So for example, we're going to develop and we deliver storage and networking and compute as the infrastructure for cloud, but there's also the opportunity to present that infrastructure as a service, just like you do any other product or technology that you're going to use to deliver through a services interface. So infrastructure as a service is a big opportunity. You've seen a number of players make announcements in that space recently. And that's in addition to building out the cloud and the infrastructure that you need.
So what do you make of Amazon's contention that this is going to be a low-margin business, which is why they're going to win?
Well, it depends on which part of it you think is low margin. I don't think this is necessarily going to be a low-margin business.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good subject for debate. I wanted to also ask you a question. On Twitter, James Governor, at MonkChips from RedMonk, brought up to me a quote recently from Tom Hogan, who's the senior VP of software at HP, who was describing at a CIO event that, you know, in some ways you could think of this just as kind of an optimized delivery channel. What do you think about that kind of description of cloud as a channel?
So I think what Tom was trying to do was sort of demystify the cloud. So let me give you an example of a service that we're working on today. It's called MagCloud. And it's a magazine publishing service. And it's an on-demand magazine publishing service that either commercial magazines can use or personal individuals can use to produce professional quality magazines. And what you do is you submit your material to a website in the cloud, and then a print service provider will print that and send it to you on demand. So you don't have any of the warehouses that you need in the traditional business. You don't have any of the waste. 62% of the magazines that are printed don't ever get used.
You know, it's kind of interesting. I remember having a conversation, it might have been with Russ Daniels, who's the CTO. Is he in the printing group?
He's the cloud CTO.
Oh, he's a cloud CTO, sorry. But maybe with somebody else in the same meeting. But we're talking about this idea of everybody thinks that advertising is the only business model. It was like, hey, we have another one. It's called printing. You know, and the fact is that you guys have built cloud services that are monetized by the sale of printers, supplies, you know, and so on.
Well, that's back to my earlier point. I mean, the most exciting thing about this is the business model change. I'll give you another example. We have a service called LogoWorks. So if you want to design anything that you would use a graphics design house for, you can go on the website and you can effectively put out an RFP for a graphics design sort of submission. And a network of graphics designers out there will respond with a proposal. You don't know who they are, you don't know where they are, but using a reputation-based system, you know the quality of their work and you know the
But it's kind of an interesting thing here. In each of your cases, you're looking at applications that drive, you know, your existing economic model, you know, namely the provision of equipment and so on. You know, in your case, networking.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think what's happened is so far all of us in the industry have thought about SaaS as being something separate, software as a service, and looking at the business models there. You know, Cisco has WebEx, which is a software as a service delivery mechanism for collaboration and conferencing. And then we thought about virtualization as a way to get to a more efficient way of improving resource utilization on infrastructure with data center virtualization. Really allows companies to utilize the data centers in a more effective way and optimize the resource utilization. We thought of that as somewhat separate, and we thought about cloud as primarily as an infrastructure as a service model. But if you think about the potential that it has to morph the industry, to me, there are two fundamental benefits that we get out of cloud computing. And actually, I think it's more than computing, right? It's cloud. Going back to your point, it's about services too. And those benefits are basically the flexibility and the speed at which you can develop applications and deploy that. I know from a CIO perspective, those are the two basic advantages that exist today. And in our conversations with customers, small businesses, large enterprises, service providers, and smaller companies, it's really those two are the basic advantages that's going to drive this transformation.
Are there any issues in the shift from sort of the CapEx model of investment to OpEx?
I was just going to get to that.
Because, you know, obviously, if there is a cost savings for the customer, that means there's presumably a sales reduction for the vendor.
No, so that's why I didn't mention cost. Actually, this was surprising. And when I was talking with our customers, we went in with the notion that the value proposition is going to be cost, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, we got a lot of pushback saying it's really not cost. It's really flexibility and the speed at which applications can be
Well, and of course,
deployed.
there's the other factor,
Because
which is demand grows as cost comes down and new things become possible.
eventually, right? But initially, if you think about a large enterprise, they already have invested capital in existing infrastructure. So somehow they have to move to a different model. And so their argument is, even though it might reduce my CapEx, my OpEx goes up. So net, it's not really a cost advantage. So I think it's sometimes a misnomer to think about cloud as being a more cost-effective solution. That really depends on the business and what they're trying to do.
Also, just even accounting rules. I mean, one case you put it on the balance sheet, the other you put it on your P&L right away.
So I think what will really drive cloud to reach the tipping point is going to be the flexibility that IT teams get in having, whether it's their own cloud, and a lot of large companies want to build their own cloud and have multi-tenancy across different functions that they serve. But there are some problems we have to solve there. You know, how do you enable security to happen? How do you enable workloads to move from one cloud to another cloud? So I think there's some tough issues still ahead of us.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on those big unsolved problems in the cloud?
We also see it as additive. I mean, traditional IT is going to be around for a long, long time. And there's a lot of work to do if those traditional applications are going to get developed in the multi-tenant environment that you need for true cloud computing. And many of them, it makes sense for them to be in the traditional IT infrastructure. So this is, to us, really a growth opportunity. It's in most cases, new, different services than the traditional ones that are being provided.
So talking about growth in the future kind of leads me to, in some sense, the big question. Where is all this going? You guys are CTOs. You think about the future. You try to guide your businesses. Okay, here are these businesses. What should they be thinking about in terms of the future of the cloud? And
I think, I'll be a little repetitive here. If you think about it, information is going to double in the next 4 years. Digital information is going to double in the next 18 months. And that's going to continue.
New Moore's Law.
So, being able to use cloud services and some of the sophisticated analytic technologies that I talked about to navigate that information and to make use of it is going to be really important.
So in some sense, the cloud story is in some ways the Web 2.0 story, which I've always been telling, which is this is really the information revolution.
That's right.
And not just the compute revolution. But what about architecture? I mean, do you think at all about, right now we still kind of, we're sort of like in the mainframe era of the cloud. There's these big clouds sitting there. Do we ever kind of have, do we rediscover peer-to-peer, for example, as the equivalent of the personal computer revolution in the cloud?
I think absolutely. I think the model we have of this big cloud that exists today, I don't think is sustainable. Just like I was saying, when we came up with the internet, it wasn't just one network that did everything, although that was how it sort of started off. So I think, to me, there are three big changes that are going to happen, right, that we're in the midst of now. The nature of work is changing. It's how collaboration is used in enterprises, how we work, where we work from. I often say we don't go to work anymore, we just work, and so mobility comes into that.
Isn't that the truth of it?
I actually have conversations with you on Twitter.
That's right. She's at Padmasree, by the way, if anybody wants to follow her.
Yeah. So I think how we work is changing and where we want to work from. So what does that mean, right? There's a lot of things that we have to do. And if you think about consumer internet-driven technologies like collaboration, Web 2.0, social networking, all of that, it's still very, very minimally used in a work environment and within an intranet, for example. And within Cisco, we are looking at how, collaboration. We did a survey. We talked to many different CEOs of large companies, small companies. Every CEO out there, everybody running a company, biggest thing they want is collaboration to happen within groups, within functions, and yet they see only about half of that demand being met. So we still have a long way to go.
So in one sense, there's a huge opportunity for all this stuff that was happening out on the consumer internet to
bring
come
it
into the business
right.
world.
And how do we do that, right? So that's one big area when I talk about the nature of work that's changing. The other thing that's changing is the nature of computing is changing. We talked about cloud computing, and there are many, many challenges there. How do we enable security to happen? What standards should we drive? Who's going to drive that? So there's a lot of opportunity there, both in the application space as well as the flexible infrastructure space. And the third thing is the focus on green. A few years ago, it was really a group of passionate people that talked about green, and today it's on every company's agenda. So green IT, what does that mean? How can we use IP networking? We are focusing, for example, in what we call micro verticals, real estate. If you think about all the urbanization that's happening in the world today, 3 billion people live in urban cities, and cities consume 75% of the energy and emit 80% of greenhouse gases. And most of the new buildings that are getting erected in Dubai, Shanghai, these kinds of cities are all going to be equipped with IP networks and sensors. And so why can't we use that technology to help if you think about all the different networks that exist in a building today, the lights, the sensors, the elevators, and the IT infrastructure, they're all separate. And how can we sort of have the IP networks play a role in enabling what we call connected real estate?
I think this is totally the future.
It's a whole another topic for another panel.
We're instrumenting the world.
There's so much innovation that needs to happen.
I totally
there.
agree.
So I think those three are fundamental shifts we are seeing.
Yeah. How about you, Shane?
Yeah, no, we agree. I mean, if you look at the carbon footprint, there's a lot of noise about data centers and IT, but it's really only 2% of the carbon footprint. However, if we put a network of sensors in place that help us manage the rest of our environment and use that through a cloud-based services interface, we can have a big impact on environmental footprint. I think it's a big opportunity. There's going to be a range, not just in the green space, but in every other space, of new services that we can't imagine today that are.
Yeah. What about smart grid kind of technology? You guys think about that at all?
We are very focused on that. This is a major area of priority for us. We're actually feeling a lot of pull from utility companies now to use some of the techniques we use in the internet world to apply that to the electric world.
Yeah, we have a research program called exascale computing, which is addressing exactly that area.
So if we have questions from the audience, do we have mics up? Yeah, so maybe come to the mics as we, it's like we've got somebody over here.
Hi.
Announce your name, please, as you.
Certainly. My name is Abraham Pachika, and great discussion about the cloud. One question I wanted to ask about is that would you agree that one barrier for people who have existing data centers going to a cloud service is the perceived control they might have when things go down, so that they know why it happened, what the action plan is, so they can communicate that internally? And if so, what are the sort of maybe unglamorous, operational aspects and SLAs that cloud service providers have to share with their customers? They feel like, it's just like if you were in control, if it was on-premise.
We've actually learned a lot about that in our services business. So if you think about either the HP outsourcing business or now the EDS part of the HP business, we do this all the time. We're one of the largest outsourcing providers in the world, and what we have to be able to do is guarantee our customers that we can hit service level agreements that are specific to their business requirements. And this is exactly the same thing that we're going to need to be able to do for consumers or anybody else that wants to use cloud services.
Over here.
Hi, good morning. My name is Wing. So today, I agree with you that clouds are mostly in silos. It takes a lot for clouds to interoperate. So I like the idea of having federated clouds and interlinked clouds, but how do we get there from an interoperability standpoint, data portability, things like that?
Yeah, so as I said, for us it's an evolution. I think we will initially have to build some of these standalone clouds, and I think we will see a combination of standalone clouds that will be private clouds and public clouds. Public cloud meaning there's a service provider who's providing you the cloud service. Private cloud meaning an enterprise builds it and operates its own cloud, and and goes back to the earlier question about what will motivate or what will give comfort to the CIO that they know where the data is going to be, et cetera. So I think there are some issues that still have to be solved there with respect to security and doing that. When we get to the intercloud, it'll take us a few years to get there. And I think the time scale will shrink too. I don't think it'll take us as long to solve some of these problems as previous generations of computing has. We have to think about load balancing. How do you move, what does workload portability have to do with naming conventions, peering, some of these same things that we did with the internet. And so those are some things that we are looking at from a Cisco perspective.
Hi, Richard Kaiser with Sanford Bernstein. During the peak of the internet bubble, venture capital contributed about $100 billion a year. Maybe in 2000, 2001, about a third of that went into equipment purchases that now startups can choose to go to a cloud instead. And because Google is a much more efficient purchaser of equipment and user of equipment, doesn't this imply a longer term shift from hardware vendors to cloud operators?
We get this question a lot, and we are driving hard on what I would call an arms supplier to the cloud providers. Many of the big cloud services companies that are building out these scalable data centers to support cloud services are building them on our products and technologies. Google happens to be one example that's building their own, but many people are realizing that there's a good business case for buying technologies from providers like HP and Cisco.
There's a comment I heard once. It was a sort of a discussion in which it was somebody at Facebook had made a comment about how they had one of the biggest data centers in the world, and some guy from an enterprise context said, you don't know, you must be smoking something. You don't understand how much compute there is in some of the banks and some of the customers that you guys deal with. Yeah. That we get a little blinded out on the consumer internet. We're not the only big consumers of your services and equipment.
But my point is, even on the consumer internet, the majority of the people out there are using commercial-based products.
Yeah. So, okay, we got one more.
Rajesh Jain from Netcore Solutions, Bombay. My question is, I think a lot of our thinking right now is still incremental in terms of things that we are doing today, which we think of moving to the cloud. I think much like what Kevin Kelly talked about yesterday, that we thought of the internet as a better version of a TV. Now, when we look at cloud computing, when you look at, say, the intercloud, what are the things that we can do, or what will we be able to do which we cannot do today? I mean, where is that leap which starts happening? What are those applications which you see which will drive the next big jump in cloud applications?
So are you thinking of things like your product maybe being one of the drivers?
Probably to a small extent, I think, but especially for countries like India or emerging markets, they can probably be early adopters in terms of leapfrogging because there's very little legacy. And there are enterprises which are growing, which can start using cloud computing without having the legacy of going through the intermediate stages of IT infrastructure themselves.
Sure, I totally agree with that. Just like we saw in the emerging countries where the mobile internet sort of allowed us to leapfrog having the fixed internet infrastructure and do some very different applications we hadn't thought about when we were thinking about the fixed internet, right? And India is a great example of that. We will see similar evolution, I think, in the emerging markets as well. And perhaps this time it might be different, right? Because I actually strongly believe this notion of innovation happening in developed markets and then getting transferred to the emerging markets is somewhat flipping now, right? Innovation now happens everywhere and we take ideas. So the kinds of applications and services that we'll see in emerging markets that can now be deployed through the cloud will be different. Like for instance, we are thinking about WebEx and WebEx Connect, the conferencing solution, which is a software as a service delivered over a cloud. And we may have a different business model for emerging countries and actually small businesses, even in developed countries, which will have the same requirement. So I think there'll be some definitely new kinds of applications delivered as services that we'll see more of in the cloud.
Shane, do you have anything to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I think the attributes that are important in this context are personalization and context. So whether you're in an emerging market or you're in a mature market, services that understand who you are, where you are, whether you're doing something in your personal life for entertainment or for business, and can provide you with information in that context, are going to be very exciting.
All right, well, speaking of context, we're getting the big red dot telling us it's time to wrap. So thank you very much.
Thank you.